Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Theology Threads. My name is Dr. Brian Jenkins, and I'm going to be joined today by my buddy Miles Langrock. And we're both thrilled to have you with us today as we discover how the thread of the gospel message of Jesus is woven into our everyday lives. Each episode, we will discuss and unpack various ideas, values, and feelings about our world and what the Bible has to teach us. So let's follow the thread together in today's episode of Theology Threads.
Dr. Brian Jenkins.
Mr. Miles Langrock, Pastor Miles, Reverend Miles Langrock.
Thank you. We're back at it again.
Back at it.
All right.
Coming at you.
So let's open with another quote.
Okay.
Gravity explains the motion of the planets, but it cannot explain who set the planets in motion.
Sir Isaac Newton.
Sir Isaac Newton.
I only know that because you told me beforehand.
I did.
I don't have like a repertoire of Isaac Newton quotes.
How do you get the sir? Can you just be knighted for, is that a thing?
Yeah, you have to be knighted by the monarch of the day. And Sir Isaac Newton, I don't know who was king or queen when Isaac Newton was knighted, but he was knighted for a fairly good reason, possibly for being one of the smartest men who ever lived. I've been to his memorial at Westminster Abbey.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I bring up that quote because we are talking about God made it.
Yes.
So that's the topic of discussion.
Yeah.
God made it. So what is it? And why are we talking about it?
A little faith no more right there. What is it?
What is it?
Yeah. So when we talk about this idea, so going back off last week's or the previous episode with Dr. Troy Jones, the idea that our faith can be kind of seen as like a seed and a worldview. So if our belief system, going back to the very first episode, our belief system is a worldview. It is a way of processing the information in the world, making sense of it. For the Christian, that worldview is rooted in Jesus Christ, but it begins to grow into something. So we have the confession of Jesus Christ is Lord, God has raised him from the dead, which if you have any questions about that, go back and check out the previous episode. Going into this, then, that belief then has a supporting structure, a stalk or a trunk, if you want to use that metaphor. I like to use the metaphor of like organic growth like that because I think it works really well. And it begins to build up on this idea. And so if our goal for these next several episodes is to discover what Christians really believe, in other words, to really refine Christian theology in such that it is, what are sort of these radical, bare essentials of faith that the vast majority of Christians can agree on. And I think the other thing is, what do I have to believe to be a Christian? Because I think the confusion comes in, do I have to believe this to be a Christian? So what we're trying to do, whether you're watching or listening, you're joining us, is really say, hey, in our opinion, this is really what it means to believe to be a Christian. And it starts out with this idea that God made it. So if you think of it, if the confession of Christianity is Jesus is Lord and God has raised him from the dead, then the creed, the belief statements of Christianity start with the idea that God is the creator of the universe. The Apostles' Creed, probably the most famous set of creeds, starts with I believe, which is credo in Latin, which is where we get the word creed. I believe in God the Father, almighty maker of heaven and of earth.
So the Apostles' Creed, where is that in church history?
Oh, it's very, very early. Great question, by the way. Very, very early. I'd have to do, we'll double check. And we'll clarify it either later online, but it's within the 2nd or 3rd century when it's called the Roman Creed or the original Latin Creed or the Roman Creed kind of comes out, and then the Apostles' Creed sort of comes out of that. It later gets refined into like the Nicene Creed and Athanasian Creed, and there's all these things, but it really says it was the idea of, as Christianity began to spread, we need to say what we all agree on.
Because there were people saying kind of different things, right?
Oh, yeah, people saying crazy stuff, right? And what happened is as Christianity began to spread, it localizes, which is kind of one of the awesome things about Christianity, is it can localize. You think of like a seed, there's lots of places that a seed can be planted. I mean, I have a dear friend of mine who hopefully will be a guest on the show near the end of the season. I'm excited. We're kind of already starting to talk about him. But when I did my doctorate, we talked about the idea of seeds and how they spread, all that kind of stuff. The fact that like all the potatoes in the world, they all come from South America originally. All the corn in the world comes from Central America. All the wheat in the world essentially just comes from North Africa. All the rice, wherever rice is grown anywhere in the world, originally comes from Southeast Asia. So the idea that these fundamental seeds, if you will, can go all over the world and find themselves, and they have different flavors and tones and notes based on the soil in which they find themselves. So I don't want to talk, what happens in Christianity is we say, oh, the tone or the note, or, brown rice is better than white rice, or we'll say that, like, oh, Yukon Gold potatoes are the best potatoes, which measurably and subjectively and objectively, Yukon Gold potatoes are the best potatoes.
And when you have a doctorate, you can make that statement.
That's right. You can trust me. I'm a doctor. But those sorts of things. But what are they doing? All they're doing is they are growing, but it's still a potato, right? It's still a rice. It's still wheat.
Or a potato.
If you will. Okay. Let's call the whole thing off. So we go through this thing. So I kind of like thinking of the gospel like that the gospel can find itself in its simplicity, that it can grow and it can be rooted anywhere and grow, even carrying some of the notes and the flavors and the tones of wherever it was planted. What the creeds do, or what these belief statements do, is they just remind us, they circle us back to the core elements of what we believe. And so the adage of that and where that came from is the emphasis on deciding that of all the things we believe, after that Jesus Christ is Lord and God has raised him from the dead, then we believe that God made everything. So God made it.
And the creed starts off that way. It's like the very initial thing.
All the creeds start with the idea of a creator God, because that's how, to get into the scriptural thread, that's how the Bible starts. In Genesis 1:1, the very beginning of the Bible, the first thing that God reveals to humanity, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the very first way that God reveals himself is not as a conqueror, not as a king, not as a warrior, not as a judge, not as anything. How does he reveal himself to us? As a creator. And so when we started talking about, and in my doctoral study, and when I started talking about what's the best way to talk about God, is God as creator. Because creator, then all these other things sort of come out of that, which we'll spend the rest of our time hopefully talking about today. So when I say that, I'll kind of give you sort of a concise form. God is the loving and benevolent creator and sustainer of all things, seen and unseen, crafting them alone and through his will. So God is the loving and benevolent creator and sustainer of all things, seen and unseen, crafting them alone and through his will. So there's a lot to unpack in there, that he is both the creator of things and the sustainer. And we've got some scriptural references for that. He's the creator, he's the sustainer of everything that there. In fact, John, in John 1, when it talks about it, says, without him was nothing made that was made, and that he is a sustainer, that he, as it says in Colossians 3, he holds all things together. And so even the very processes that drive the universe now are still sustained by his glory, and that he did it alone. And that's really one of the unique things about, especially Judeo-Christianity and the sort of Semitic monotheistic religions, is that when they talked about God and creation, God wasn't a part of creation. It's the only ancient religion of the world where God is not a part of creation, that he is the creator.
Part of creation being like kind of an off...
an off product of creation, that he is solely, uniquely, pre-existingly a creator in and of himself.
Yeah, pre-existing, and we see this and I'm glad you're bringing up all the other verses too, because it's important for us when we establish theology to not just look at one scripture, but look, does this stand up to the test of all of scripture, and is this thread existent through all of it?
And does it weave itself consistently?
Right.
Because I think we do it here, and then we grab this, and we look at the consistent pattern. And that's one of the great things, by the way, about the Bible, is that it does yield itself consistently.
So the pre-existing nature, like pre-exist, so to exist before,
right?
In the beginning, God.
Right.
So, which is crazy, right? Like God's already there.
Right. Yes.
It's almost he's before the beginning.
Yeah. So he exists entirely outside of creation. He's so incredibly transcendent. And because he's by himself, in essence, or within the Trinity, he is not dependent on any other single thing. And what's fascinating is even in the ancient world, that was completely unique to the Jewish people. Every god was dependent upon something else.
And there were multiple gods.
Yeah, multiple gods who are dependent on each other.
Yeah.
Gods who are dependent on humanity to feed them. Gods who are dependent on the rains to make, God is just Yahweh, the God of the Jews, sits outside of all of it above it.
I am that I am.
I am that I am, as he reveals himself to Moses. And so he is self-contained and he doesn't need anything to exist. So any act of creation is not obligatory. In other words, he's not obliged to create. He chooses to create. And that has massive implications.
I'll ask that question later on. Yeah. But what's important about all
what's
this?
important about that?
So before we get there, look at that. My tablet decided to sleep on us. Okay.
Are we that boring that even the tablets are like mine did too? So yeah, this is that.
That's funny. Okay.
I can't even keep my tablet awake.
We've discovered what this means. And we started to go a little bit on to how do we know this. Mm-hmm. So Genesis 1 was one example, and for good reason. Like it's the beginning of the book. Genesis meaning beginning.
Yeah, Genesis means beginning. The Hebrew name of the book in Genesis is literally the phrase "in the beginning." Mm-hmm. So from a biblical point of view, there's a constant affirmation that the Creator God is the one both speaking the universe into existence, Genesis 1, driving the creation, sustaining, Colossians 3. I want to make sure we get the passages right, but Colossians 3:16, I think, and following. And then he's also this idea of the pre-existent nature of it, the sustaining nature of it, and that is a consistent imagery. We see that in Job, that God held things back in chapters 38 and 39, that he measured out, speaking poetically, but he measured out the coastlines and he keeps the water back.
Well, very, very beautiful part of Job is kind of in his correction of Job, when he says, were you there when I set the foundation, or he set the measurements of it's almost as if he's like saying, I set the laws of the universe, all the different thermodynamic laws and things like that. Yeah. He's obviously not saying that to Job, because Job would be like, what the heck are you talking about?
I don't know. Maybe Job was into thermodynamics. You don't know.
That's true.
The Bible doesn't say he wasn't.
He doesn't say he wasn't.
So there you go.
But okay, so Job. And then you mentioned John too.
Yeah. So in John, you get this amazing passage that comes really not out of Judaism at all, fascinatingly enough, but it comes right out of more like Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy.
Okay, Platonic
speaking of Plato, Aristotelian speaking of Aristotle. These are you have the three major philosophers of the ancient world: Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates.
Yeah,
okay, and so they had this concept in the ancient Greek world called the Logos. And it was the idea that the Logos was it was as if reason had its own identity. Now, it wasn't a person, okay, but the reason, the logic, the words, the laws behind the universe, and that was sort of the driving, the animus, if you will, the animating power of the universe. And so John, when he's writing to his Greek readers, says, in the beginning was the Logos. And all his Greek readers said, yes, we know that already. And he says, but the Logos, as you know him, is actually God. And when he's saying God, he's referring to the God of the Hebrews. And they would be like, what? And it said, yes. So you kind of ish, again, those three, the most powerful words any theologian can ever use, I-S-H, ish. So yeah, John is saying, Greek audience, yeah, ish, he's kind of that, but he's more. Mm-hmm. He's God. He's this God I'm going to tell you about. And it's like, that's kind of interesting. So the Logos is the God of the Hebrews. Yeah, okay, well, maybe we can get on board. He says, and in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. Okay, so wait, now you're saying that he's
separate
separate. So he was there, but he's separate. And then literally in the Greek, it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and God was the Word. So it says the Word was with God, and God is the Logos. So John makes no mistake that he says, there is a being that I'm going to introduce you to. He is in fact the Logos, the actual driving, animating force behind the universe. And he's not a concept or a force or a power. He's a person, and he is also the God of the Hebrews also. And then he goes down to John 1:14. The Word, the Logos, became flesh and dwelt among us. And then he starts telling the story of Jesus Christ.
Beautiful.
So John just does this amazing, this amazing philosophical riff that's just incredible. And he's playing with their philosophy, and he's tying it in, which has all to do with reason. And he's making really this reasoned argument. And then he says, and now let me introduce you to who that person is. So in that, he's tying the philosophical concept, the sort of the pagan secular concept of the Logos. He's tying with the Hebrew God, and then he's taking the historic Jesus and tying all of them together and saying, and he walked among us, and he ate fish, and he fell asleep, and he cried when his friend died. And then he tells us this story of this very earthy, human, divine Jesus. And so that's why John's such an incredible book.
So the word being Logos. Is there any connection to the word and then when we look in Genesis, God speaking things into existence? Or is that kind of like a weird...
So Philo of Alexandria, who was also a Jewish philosopher of that kind of that same time period, sort of tied that together, but really it's better to look at the Logos. In my opinion, it's better to look at the Logos as John using it as he's sort of appropriating this Greco-Roman philosophical idea, and then he's using that to bridge over into Christian truth. In the beginning, what we know from God speaking things into existence in Genesis 1, where it says, and he said, and he said, and he said, that's really a testimony to the incredible power of God, that he doesn't even have to do anything, that he creates solely, that he has such authority over the universe that all he has to do is say something and it comes into being.
That's a miracle.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
In Genesis 1, it lists off all these things that he's created. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes this passage is almost like a rift in the scientific community or the way people who are maybe are reasonable or in this or just society in general, post kind of like we were ruled by myths, and not,
right, yeah.
not
So
us.
after sort of post-religious scientific, idea thinking, again, we're talking 15th, 16th century, where people are moving away from religion or the mystical as the foundations of societal and intellectual life to more human intellect, reason, and observational truth as the foundation of human life.
Right, and it's very hard to observe that,
right?
because it was a long time ago.
Right.
So, recently we've talked about doubt, mm-hmm. and so how should someone who's a listener of this podcast or just someone who's a thinker, how do we approach this? Should we be afraid of this passage? Should we be concerned that there are people who would say that this is just a myth?
Right.
Or what can we derive from? Like, why is this important to us?
Well, I think if we can sort of reflect back on the discussion on Jesus Christ as Lord with Troy, the idea of dogma, doctrine, and opinion. So what are the opinions about this truth? What are the doctrines? In other words, what are the biblically validated, but maybe there's room to interpret differently? Mm-hmm. And then what's the dogmatic? What is the absolute core main teaching of the church on this particular issue? And I think on this one, God made it. The how, the when, the why, I personally believe that can be moved down to a doctrinal discussion, that you may have some who believe in what's called the new earth, which is that the earth is only 6,000 or 8,000 years old. And if you do all the math in the Bible, it sort of adds up to like...
Counting generations.
That. It comes out to like October 29th of like 6400 BC or something like that. Like someone actually did the work. I think it was Warfield maybe was the one who did the work on that. But someone actually like did the math and came up with the day that the earth was created. But then there's another school of theory that said, no, we can look at science, we can look at the data that we have or the reason that we have, and we can say, yes, I believe God made the world, and he chose to do it over a process of 13.8 billion years, and this is how he did it. So those would come down to the doctrinal, maybe even the opinion level. The dogma level, the what do Christians believe, is that God is the one. However he chose to do it, God is the one. That the universe is here on purpose, for a purpose, that anything that exists is because he wills it. So if it has existence, it's because God wills it to be. And there's nothing, as John says, nothing can exist, nothing that was not made without him.
Yes. So, and that doesn't, it sounds like that includes not just the material, but the immaterial as well, right? So if he's created, the physical, things, but he's also created, I don't know, maybe like morals or ethics, or is that a fair way to say
It's an interesting question. I think what we have, so there's the seen and the unseen. We'll probably see how the Bible talks about it. The unseen would tend to be more like the metaphysical, like angels, demons, that sort of thing. And we say that he's the creator of all things. Things like morals, ethics, the rules, those are the patterns that are established by him. So one of the ways to look at it is because we believe God made things on purpose for a purpose, that means he made them intentionally. And if something's made intentionally, that means it has a purpose. That means that it has a rules. It has a good version of it and a non-working, here's how it works, here's how it doesn't work. And that's where things like ethics and morals come into play, because if we live in the universe the way God intended us to live in the universe, the way he intended it to be, then we are living ethically and morally. When we go against that, because we have the decision to choose, now we are living unethically or immorally. And by the way, we all feel that. You may not be a Christian listening to this, and yet you feel a sense of violation of the way things should be, right? So if you are not a Christian, but you go to Costco and you have your blinker on to get into a parking spot and someone skirts around you and,
cuts in line
and gets in there, something inside you is going to say, oh, that is a violation of the way things ought to be.
I was here first.
In other words, you are saying there's a universal code of conduct that everyone should apply to, and you violated it. And the Christian would say, you're right, and that's because God made the universe in a way that it was intended to operate, all the way down to your parking spot at Costco.
Yeah, the Christian.
Or Trader Joe's, because they're the worst.
Hey.
And the best, and I'll take a Trader Joe's sponsorship, but you got to fix your parking lots.
That's so funny. So the Christian would say that's the ethics and all those things align with this idea that we have a creator. And so to use the water bottle example, I love that one. That how do we know this is a good water bottle?
Right,
because it does what it
does what it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
great water bottle, by the way.
Absolutely. Vacuum sealed.
Yeah, it's a
double
high
wall.
Quality water bottle.
Yeah, high quality H2O.
Yeah.
So
that's funny.
So, but there's others that would say that you can get to this ethics or morals phenomenon, because I think it can be agreed it's a phenomenon or just unique that we
have them and nothing else does.
Right. Yeah. So, but so thinkers I think of Sam Harris or folks who would deny that there's
Dawkins, Hitchens.
Yeah. And they say, well, we can just get to ethics, without all of that. Mm-hmm. So, that's not what we're saying.
No, we're saying that these things exist because God made the universe. We're saying that the desire for ethical behavior, or even we'll use a bigger word, the idea for justice. Your longing for justice or for fairness or for equity in the world around you is because we would argue that there's a sense in which we all know there's a way the world ought to work, and when it doesn't work that way, we are upset or offended. And I would say that is God, that God, that there's a way things ought to go because God made it and intended that way. If it's all just a natural sort of cascading tiles of event after event after event and electron after electron and, protein chain after protein chain or protein chain, the only way you get truly ethical in terms of morally ethical, not just societally beneficial.
Yeah, or just objectively.
Yeah, like if it's no, that's wrong, is to borrow morality from religious faith. Mm-hmm. Because if we are only here to survive, then the only right is survival. And that doesn't explain things like self-sacrifice.
Right.
Because that would be antithetical. It would actually be immoral to sacrifice yourself so that something else could live, if your only morality is existence.
Yeah, so why were the Vikings wrong? To go around and pillage and take for themselves, because that, according to their worldview,
right,
that was perfectly
reasonable. And that's,
reasonable.
by the way, the reason why is because that's how their gods conquered their cosmology by, pillaging and conquering and taking over. And so they were a natural reflection of that. So you say, well, why does it matter? And why are we talking about the Vikings and Christopher? It's simple, because the reason you care about anything, my argument or my thesis would be, is because God made it that way. And the sign that you care is a sign that there's a God who made it that way. And that's what I would invite you to consider, is that maybe the reason I care about this thing is because there's something inside of me that's pointing back up. What Pascal called the God-shaped, Blaise Pascal, the mathematician, the French mathematician, called the God-shaped vacuum in our hearts, that there's a space that is longing to be filled by something, and that would be him, because he put it there. He made it.
God made it, and he made it intentionally, made it for a purpose, and that explains both the material and, if there's a purpose for it, then if we do things outside of that purpose, then that's, there's immorality that enters the scene and all that. So that makes sense on a large scale, but and I know we're kind of breaching the answer here, but why does that matter to me today? Why does it matter to, how I go to work, like how I live my life?
I guess one of the quickest and easiest ways to say that is that if you believe God made everything, then you shouldn't be racist. Like, I'll just start with that. Because if I believe that God made someone, that means God wants them here. And God made them just like God made me, which means that God values them, God loves them, God desires to have a relationship with them. And so what you get from the idea of a universal God that created all human beings is you get something we call, in modern thinking, human rights. The reason there is rights to humanity is because that person was created by a greater divine being that wants them here. Human rights come not from necessarily Enlightenment thinking, but it really comes from the idea that people matter because God put them here. So the things about equality, why would anyone be equal? Especially those who may be weaker than others. Well, if we're just talking about natural law, again, I'll quote it and I'll quote it again. As Tennyson said, nature red in tooth and claw. But yet there's something inside of us that says, no, the weak should be protected, uplifted. What is that? It's because God made them. That's the impact of that. I can't be sexist. I can't be misogynist. I can't be racist. I can't be someone who is oppressive of another person, because if I'm doing that, I'm coming against something God made. So James, in James chapter 3, when he talks about what comes out of your mouth, he says, out of your mouth comes both blessings to God, and yet you curse the one made in his image. How does that make any sense? How could you praise God? So if I'm a Christian and I have a problem with this people group or that group of people or that gender or that expression of whatever or that political party, and I rage against them, I loathe them, I just rail against them, I am not being consistent with the dogma that God made them.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying, God, you made a mistake when you made that person.
Yeah, Jesus, I feel like addresses this in multiple different contexts through the thread of the gospel, but the Good Samaritan, I think, is a good example because at that time the Israelites or the Jews were very opposed to the Samaritans. Right, they go the long way around if they were making the trek down.
And it was an ethnic, religious, traditional, nationalistic hatred. I mean, let's not pull punches.
Sure.
They hated them. They considered them dogs, ethnically, religiously, nationally.
Yeah, and that's probably as one of the one very similar way we can tie that to the racism and things like that. So, but what does Jesus say? There's the Good Samaritan, right? And then the question is, love God and love my neighbor. Well, who's my neighbor? He says, and then he gives that story.
Right, and he tells a story, and the hero of that story is the one that a traditional Jew of the time would have hated. He's the hero. Who is the neighbor? Who's the one who acted the most neighborly? And he said the Samaritan. Why? Because we're all capable of that. We are just who we are, and we are who God has put us here to be. And so Jesus elevates that. So all of these things that we hear now, the cries that come in our modern society, and rightly so, for equity and justice and equality and care and human dignity, they can all find their greater root, their greater connection, to the idea that God made everything and everyone. Former President Harry S. Truman said, all men are created equal because all men are created in the image of God. That's where the idea, at least in the American context, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable, in other words, rights that cannot be removed from them, simply because they exist. So why does someone have value? Because they exist. Not because of what they offer to society, not because of what they can or can't contribute, not because of anything other than their existence, because God put them there.
Yeah, and that specific idea of being created in the image of God, we find in that same passage of Scripture in Genesis 1.
Yeah, let us make man in our own image. So he's speaking of his triune nature, which also involves the complexity of humans' own makeup as well as human relationships. What is that image? A lot of people, there's a debate about it, but I think ultimately it's the capacity to choose and create, to choose and to determine. Just as God does, he allows us to do the same thing. So even the concept of thinking about it is a reflection of the image of God. Like a fish doesn't wonder why it's a fish, as far as we know. A fish doesn't, I guess I don't know.
If you were Aquaman, you could just ask.
I could. I mean, yeah, but fortunately, I'm not Aquaman because he's the worst.
Yeah.
He talks to fish. I mean, come on.
That's the extent of his powers, right?
He can also talk to shellfish and crab.
And those aren't fish.
No, they're shellfish.
Right, crab. Okay.
They just want everything for themselves because they're so shellfish.
There we go.
There it is.
Okay, so let's one thing that you've introduced these 4 questions that worldviews try to answer. Questions of origin, of purpose, ethics, and destiny.
Yeah.
So how does this truth that God made it, how does that intersect with these questions?
Yeah. So how does it kind of, to use the metaphor of the show, how does that weave in? If one of the biggest questions we ask is, where do I come from? Christianity has an answer for it. God made you. Where does the universe come from? Like I said, I think in another conversation, I said, that Bible quiz question, where does the universe come from? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Christianity, as a worldview, provides an answer to really maybe the most fundamental question. Where did we come from? Now, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, you can say that's wrong, all right, but Christianity teaches that the world came into existence. And because we have origin, intentional origin, and that's one of the key ideas, Miles, of this, is that it's an intentional origin. In fact, many of the ancient worldviews and many of the ancient sort of pagan religions, a lot of times creation was an accident, the result of a war or a conflict or a mistake by one of the gods or something like that.
Yeah, one is like a god's taking a bath or something.
Yeah.
And then like something splashes out. And that's what the universe is.
Yeah, or like one of them kills another god and his teeth become the mountains. And, it's that sort of thing. Our faith teaches us that God, the creator, benevolent, pre-existing, almighty, omnipotent God of the universe said, I want this here. I'm going to put this here. And that's why we're here. And because we have intent, in other words, because creation has intention, now it can answer the next question, which is purpose. So not just where did I come from, but why am I here? So Christianity now has 2 of the 4 answered. We're here because God wants us here, and we're created to worship and to glorify God. And there was another statement someone actually put in the comments, so I'm going to get it wrong again, whoever put it in there. But that the man's chief aim is to worship, glorify God. And so now we have purpose. We're here to glorify God and to steward creation. And that brings in discussion of like work and purpose and all that kind of stuff. So now I have origin. Now I have purpose. So the next question is, okay, well, what about my morality? Okay, well, if I'm here on purpose, in other words, if I'm intentionally made and I'm here for a purpose, then now morality is established relative to that purpose. Am I living under the intention that I was made? I now have a reason to judge if things are good or bad. I have a reference point. Am I living in reference to the intention under which I was made and the pattern in which we were intended to live? So God put patterns into the universe, both physically with the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the law of quantum mechanics, all that kind of stuff. And he also put metaphysical laws in place, like don't take things that belong to you, that don't belong to you. Don't kill someone unless I guess you have a good reason, but there's rarely ever a good reason. Don't lie just because it's convenient. Don't hurt people. Don't oppress people. Like these are all rules that God laid into place. So now I have an answer to where did I come from? I have an answer to why am I here? I have an answer to how do I know how to live? How do I know how to live what is moral? By living under the purposes and the intention and the plan under which I was created. And then finally, the fourth big question, destiny. What happens when I die? And that is also a part of the creation God made. Not just the earthly life, the temporal life as we call it, but eternal life is a part of that same created reality. And so I know I've said it a few times and whatever. One of the reasons that Christianity rises up as such a powerful worldview is because it takes those four big questions of life and it has answers that run cross-connected and threaded and woven into every single one of them that are consistent. And so that's how those two things work together. So when we talk about these four main teachings of the church, which we'll cover, we'll see how each of them both interweave into the four main questions of all spiritual life and all sort of human life. And that's what makes it so compelling.
Christianity is done, anecdotally. So just for myself, like it's meant everything to me and how I'm shape my life and the things I choose to do. And so, yeah, to suggest that it's the superior worldview, like I don't apologize for that. Like it means the world
works
to
for me.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say it works for me. I work for it. Like it is the reason I think that it is the reason that it quote unquote works for people is because it brings us back to how we were meant to live and how we were meant to exist. And one of the reasons that it's so unique is because it runs contrary to when we try to make our own worldviews or our own systems, our own moral systems up. It asks us to do things that we would never intuitively do, to serve, to sacrifice, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Our human nature wants to be transactional. Our human nature wants to be oppressive. Our human nature wants to have others live for us. And Christianity says, no, you were actually designed to live for something else, including each other.
Yeah, so when we struggle to believe that God made it, then the task is upon us then to answer all those questions.
Right. So how do you, like, if there's no God out there, not to be confrontational, I don't know why I got like, hey, you.
Hey, I don't think that.
But how then would you answer that? Okay, so there's really only kind of two answers. Either there's nothing out there, or there's something/someone out there. That's kind of it.
Right.
Okay. So if there's nothing out there, then how do you answer any of these questions? Okay, origin. How did we get here? We just did. Okay, well, how did we get there? Well, we can take you back. I mean, it was this thing on NPR I was doing some research getting ready for today, and I just saw it, and they said, well, we can take you back to like right before the Big Bang, but then all the laws of natural physics and quantum physics break down, so we can't really tell you what's at the very beginning. Okay, so just take it on faith, I guess, is what you're asking. So there's a miracle there, and then it all plays out. Okay, well, purpose. Well, there's no real purpose to anything because it wasn't here intentionally anyway. So now I have to discover my own purpose. Okay, which is fine because we say stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
Look deep inside yourself, discover your own purpose. A wish is a dream your heart makes, that kind of thing.
And in a vacuum.
Wait, a dream is a wish your heart makes.
I don't know.
And it's a Disney thing. I don't know.
I think it's sung usually.
I don't know. I really don't.
Is that Pinocchio? I'll keep digging. No, I want to
be
keep.
honest. I don't care.
You didn't get a doctorate in Disney
No.
Disneyology?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I like some Disney movies.
The old ones are the best.
I don't know. I mean, Cars is good.
That's true. Although don't look now, but that's considered old.
Oh, yeah? Monsters, Inc.'s the best, though. He picked me up like a laser beam and shook me like a dog. I love that part.
So if in a vacuum, you defining purpose, I mean, I would even say that even for yourself, just for yourself is difficult. But what happens when multiple people have different interpretations?
Right. And so it's just not functional. Okay, so origin, we don't really have a reason to be here. why we're here. Purpose, we don't really have a reason to be here. Well, then morality, well, then what does it matter what we do? Because destiny, nothing, we're all just going to, the sun's going to shut down about 15 billion years anyway. So literally everything that's ever happened in all of human existence won't matter. Unless we live forever.
Well, or go to a different solar system.
Well, now you're doing another movie, WALL-E. But yeah, unless we do that, which is not going to happen, by the way, but because what's the point then? So if you want to live like that, it's like we said in the very first episode, right? Nihilism's not so bad if you don't think about it. But I have to think about things, Miles. I want to think about things. And the more I think about it, the only thing that can bring me peace or meaning is the fact that at the very least, there's a transcendent being out there who wants me here. And if I believe that, then now I have to say, then why do you want me here? How can I live under the fact that you put me here? Remember, he's a creator. I said at the very beginning, he's a creator. And because he's a creator, that means that he has now the capacity and the responsibility to provide for me, to care for me. If he's a good creator, which I then believe he is, that he put me here for a reason. So he wants me to know that reason. He wants me to have a relationship to him as my creator. He takes care of me. He protects me. That's why the metaphor of creator is so powerful. And because he's my creator, he's also in charge of me. So he is my king. He is my father, all those sorts of things. That's why creator is such a powerful metaphor for God.
Yeah. That's really good. One of the things you were saying that got me thinking was there's a quote that's there are no atheists in a foxhole.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you said you want to think about these things, right? But there's a lot of people that go through life and they probably don't think about these things and they choose not to, or it's kind of this indifference, like how could I know, or how could I, all that. So I'm just not going to worry about it because I got bills. I got I got to get my kids through school and all these different things, right? But then life gets really difficult sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then you're forced to
are forced to think about it.
Right. When, say someone in a family passes, or you don't, or you built your life upon this idea of yourself that you're this person. You're
a successful businessman.
Successful, competent, whatever.
Right.
And then something completely stripped away from you. Mm-hmm. We actually just celebrated recently a baptism with someone who part of their testimony that they said was that they built up this business over like 20 years or something like that as an entrepreneur, did all themselves, right. And then it was all taken away from them.
Right.
And in those moments, these kind of questions, are ones that we start asking, because everything that mattered to me now is taken away, and so now I have to ask myself, okay, what is my purpose? Mm-hmm. And where do I come from?
And Christianity has an answer for that.
Yeah.
God made you. So you do have a purpose independent of what, even if it's the one you came up for yourself. Your very purpose is existence. And that seems trivial, but it's not fundamentally when you really think about it. What am I going to tie my life to? Because if my life is about, I'm going to make sure my kids are more successful than I was. Well, what if your kids aren't successful? You've just wasted it. We depending on when you watch this, and our recording of it, the Super Bowl was just a few weeks ago, right? And you saw I just remember watching these guys when it was the Chiefs and the other guys.
The other guys.
Who they play? The 49ers. Oh, because the 49ers lost. Yeah.
That's right. You predicted the Chiefs were going to
we love
win.
You, California.
That's why. You have a vendetta from the California story.
We've already taken some California. We love you, California. Yeah. But I just remember looking at the look on the 49ers player, like the looks on their faces. And there were a few guys that it was absolute hopelessness. Because their whole life is defined by being a premier athlete, the best in the world at their sport, and their league is the best in the world at that sport, and they still came up short. So what do you have on the other side of that? It's what my wife calls the what then. What is your answer to the what then? Let's say, Miles, you get everything you've ever wanted in life. Okay, what then? Let's say you get nothing you've ever wanted in your life. Yeah. What then? And the thing about Christianity, it has an answer. The what then is eternity. The what then is relationship with God. The what then is knowing your creative purpose. The what then is knowing that you're made for more than just this stuff. There is a what then, and it's on the other side of all of this. But it starts by acknowledging that the only reason I have a what then is I have a what happened before. And that's that God, when we say God made it, I know it's fun to talk about creationism versus intelligent design versus scientific theory.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, dinosaurs. Did Adam have a belly button? Where did the dinosaurs come from? And did the devil put their bones into the earth to confuse Christians and all this kind of stuff, right? And sure, whatever. What I'm saying is one of the biggest reasons to trust and believe in a transcendent created God is that at one point your life will make no sense. What will you do then? Where will you go then? And if you are left to realize that you are the source of your own meaning, Nietzsche said, I looked into the abyss and the abyss looked back. And if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. And the only way to not go completely bonkers is to not think about it. And then Christianity comes along and says, hold on, let's think about it. Let's be rational. Look at the world around you and the precision by which it exists. Maybe someone did that on purpose. Look at something is here. Why is there something rather than nothing? Think about it. Maybe somebody wanted it here. How do you know that this is a good thing or a bad thing? Maybe because somebody designed it that way. But I always think back to William of Ockham, right? The famous Occam's razor. All things being equal, the simplest answer is usually the best one. What makes more sense to you? What feels right? Because when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. When you experience it, it feels right. And when you live it out as a value, it's proven that it's a better way to live.
And none of those are at the expense of the other.
No.
They're all in harmony with one another.
Yeah. I don't have to sacrifice my experience of the world for my understanding of the world. And I'm allowed to tie my morality, my values, and my behavior to my understanding and my experience of the world. And that's what makes it a coherent and powerful worldview. So God made it. He put it here. Why is there something rather than nothing? The Christian answer for that is because the God of the Bible wanted it to be here. And now, what does he do? He invites us to discover the why, so that you don't have to even listen to us to define your own meaning. You can go to God right now and say, God, why did you put me here? People do that in the Bible all the time. Why am I here? Why am I going through this? Why? The Bible is full of the why question. You may not even be a person of faith, but for just a second, you could say, okay, God, why am I here? And don't be surprised when he answers in some form or fashion. But if you're looking for the answer, he's here because he wants you here. And he wants you here because he has a reason for you.
And we haven't brought this up, but we would also assert that because he loves us. Yeah. That's what I mean when I say he wants us here. Yeah.
That he loves us, that we're here because I keep saying it, because he wants us here. At least one person wants you here. I had a friend, we were at like a kids' Bible camp type thing, right? And there's this kind of loner kid who's kind of all by himself all week. And my friend was his camp counselor. And he kind of befriended the kid and was walking around with him. And on the last night of the camp, the kid was just in tears, crying. And my buddy goes up to him. His name is David. And David goes up to him. He says, hey, bud, the little kid. My friend's name is David. He goes, hey, bud, what's the matter? And the kid's like, oh, I only have one friend. And David's like, oh, man, this kid thinks I'm his only friend. Like, I've really made a connection with this kid. Like, oh, wow, this is really meaningful. I have shaped this young man's life. And so he says, hey, bud, it's because I only have one friend. And my buddy David goes, hey, buddy, it's okay. Jesus is your friend. And the kid goes, I was counting him. So it's this really, so at the very least, God's on your side. Like, we think that God's our enemy. Like, God's against us. But nothing in the Bible teaches that. We can go against God, but God is not against us. Only when we stand in opposition to him does he say, hold on, what is this? This is not the way that you're created to live. This is not, we talked about it as we were prepping for this, the shalom. This is not the intended idea. This is not the wholeness. That's all he wants for us, is to live in the pattern that he's woven together for us to live in. And by accepting the fact that he did all of that on purpose and that it's really awesome and great, in fact, it's the best, that's where peace and fulfillment and living in life, it comes as a result of that, not by defying it.
So look out, because if God is that only friend, if God is for you, who can be against you?
Right. Right? Paul brings that up. If God is for us, then who could be against us? And when we realize that God wants us here, now we realize God's on our side. And even in the things we do wrong, Miles, even in the things we do wrong, he wants us here so bad that even when we try to live without him, he still makes a way for us to be with him. And that's through Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ comes because God made us, and he made us to dwell with him together forever. And in order to secure that, he brings us into the doctrine of Jesus Christ. He brings us the person of Jesus Christ. He, the creator himself, becomes flesh and walks among us. And we beheld him, the only one of the Father, full of grace and truth, right? Carrying the full majesty of God on earth. And what does he do? He sacrifices himself so that we can still be in that eternal relationship with God if we choose.
Yeah, so we're getting into kind of where this is going, right? So God made it.
God made it, but there's a problem.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that
in our next episode. Yeah. I think I'll say this. I think a lot of people may have thought, okay, well, they'll get into like creationism versus science debate and, Bill Nye versus Ken Ham or whatever, right? Honestly, whatever. Okay, like if you need it, whatever. But the truth is that God made it. That's all he's really asking you to believe, like really fundamentally believe. And when we say believe, all the way back to episode 1, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to trust it. And if I fully understand it, I'm not trusting it, I'm comprehending it. So let some things be a mystery. Be okay with not having all the answers. Trust and believe so that you may one day know. And don't try to do it the other way around.
Wonderful.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Please take a second to like and subscribe for notifications. Follow us on social media and share this conversation with your friends. If you can, as well, leave a 5-star review on your podcast app so others can find us. Thank you, Dr. Brian. It's been an excellent episode.
Thanks, Miles. We'll see you when we see you. On the flip side.
Okay.
Whatever. I don't know.